Did you know that family is God's design? Did you also know that it's God's idea for a beautiful marriage and a beautiful covenant? It was not designed by government, nor can it be mimicked, recreated, or deconstructed to fit cultural norms. True marriage as God designed can only be between a man and a woman, a biological man and a woman, as it clearly lays out in the book of Genesis. And for that reason, did you also know that marriage is a ministry to the entire world? Well, I'm going to talk about that today and much more on this episode. But first, let me just take a moment and recognize our friends at Seeds Family Worship. This is an incredible ministry that's meant so much to my family, and I cannot strongly encourage you enough to get God's word in your children's hearts with Seeds Family Worship. You can use our promo code Standing Firm to receive your 30% off coupon. Promo code Standing Firm and get Seeds Family Worship on your family playlist today.
Welcome to Seeds Family Worship. Our mission is to help kids and families get into God's Word. And here's how we do it. We sing God's Word. We believe that kids who sing God's Word know God's Word. And kids that know God's Word love God. We have over 178 word-for-word scripture songs across all streaming platforms, including Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon, and more.
Welcome back, friends. I'm Toni Stockton on Standing Firm, where our biblical faith and culture collide. So today we're talking about marriage, we're talking about families, homes, and why they've been under such immense attack over many generations and why they're rapidly deteriorating over the years. And if you really stop and think about it, could it be that our society has lost their compass, their true north, their first love, which means they've lost God's design, they've lost God's vision and his heart for families? Well, again, I want to dive into that. I want to share some stories with you today and hopefully encourage you and open your eyes as to, I know there's a lot of things that are compartmentalized in our culture, different attacks on gender, attacks on marriage, but the ultimate attack, again, is on God's beautiful design and why marriage is so important. So I wanted to share this with you. You know, I'm a homeschool mama. My kids learn by stories. And, last night I was watching an old interview of Ronald Reagan, and I think it was with Tom Brokaw. I don't know if you guys remember him. I'm kind of going way back in the archives. But Ronald Reagan was asked about his religion. And Tom Brokaw says, "So is your religion important to you?" And he said, "Well, I wouldn't necessarily call it my religion. It's my relationship. And I learned that from my mother. I learned that from my parents." But in particular, Ronald Reagan said that his mother's deep love for God, for family, and her prayers sustained him and taught him to trust God no matter what. And, I found that interesting because of all the things. I mean, she didn't know her son was going to grow up to be the next president of the United States and to do something very significant and very powerful. And so today, I just want to kind of pull back the curtain, and expose some cultural lies that have seduced women out of their homes and away from their families. And my hope, and I want to pray over you after this broadcast today, but my hope is that you see and recognize how important it is for mothers to be at home with their families and how important it is and how vital our role as women and mothers is to our children and to this generation and the next. So I'm reminded again, marriage, why it's so important. And I heard this saying, you've probably heard it before, but the saying is, as the family goes, so goes the nation. And I really don't think people really understand God's word is the launching pad for everything in our life. I tell my kids that God's word it's your compass for everything you do in life. And you see God's word as a framework for a loving marriage, how we treat each other, how we treat our children, how we raise our children, how we educate our children, and how we are to recognize how God's word helps us recognize in this sinful, fallen world lies from truth. And so, again, I tell my kids all the time, the word of God is your compass. It's what guides you in everything that you do. So, ladies, today it seems as our society has gone down, or is going down and has gone down, a very destructive and dividing path, tearing down families in America. So honest question, and here's where I want to land today and really talk about it, is how did we get here? I mean, how did we get to a place where a woman staying home with her children was meant she was looked upon as less than, or a woman being a homemaker or a help to her community through volunteer work? What about this? What about a woman not wanting to go to college? That might rattle some of you a little bit. And I'm not saying a woman going to college is a bad thing, quite the contrary. But what I'm saying is, what if women, want to get married and stay at home and raise a family? Why does our society frown upon that? I mean, these are some things to just pause and think about. Why was that portrayed? Again, when did this start happening where a woman being at home with her family, raising her children, being a helpmeet to her husband, when did that started to be looked upon as remedial work? And ask yourself, who or what started to filter in these lies to the American women? I see, just the media, different outlets pitting man against woman and making the relationship between the two more of a competition rather than a marriage, a partnership. What about this? Do you ever hear holy matrimony anymore? Maybe I think the last few marriages the last few weddings that I went to, I hardly ever hear that anymore. And why? Our society is not honoring marriage as God designed. Women acknowledging that it's an honor to be her husband's helpmeet. When did the mindset change and people stop fighting for the family? Okay, well, if you're anything like me, and let me just kind of just share a little bit with you. I'm not going to go into my whole testimony, but I came from a divorced family, and I'm a product of the 70s. I was born in 73. Yes, I'm 50. And I got to witness just all kinds of the sexual revolution. I am woman, hear me roar. A woman is better served being in the workforce than she is being at home. I got to witness all of that. And we're going to get into all that because I want to talk about some pivotal boundary stones that were removed that brought in a new way for women to start thinking, and that made us drift farther and farther away from the biblical design of womanhood and motherhood. So again, I used to wonder, what was that moment in history, or moments, that we started to see advancement of the biblical family starting to deteriorate here in America and ultimately weaken our nation. Now, I can't make this obviously an entire history lesson, and there's a lot that goes into this. I'm a homeschool mama. I love to teach my kids on history and pivotal timelines throughout our history, and but I wanted to at least give you some benchmark moments that forever shifted the mindset of the American people, and that they started to perceive the traditional American family as something that was bad, and in particular, the woman's mindset. And hey, I'm not speaking against my sisters. I'm a woman, of course, but I do recognize that our role was really twisted and perverted, and many women, unfortunately, were seduced and bought into the lie that they were better served going into the workforce, putting their children in daycare. And again, it was all a seduction of the enemy to get the primary figure out of the home. And then also, too, it started to twist and manipulate the roles of women. I mean, my goodness, you guys, you're seeing all kinds of stuff today. So let's walk down memory lane, and let's point out some significant moments in our history that had devastating effects on the American family and moved major, what I would like to say, building blocks from under the family, which ultimately, again, weakened our nation, which brought us to the unthinkable happening. I mean, guys, ladies, men marrying men, women marrying women, drag queens reading to children in libraries, genderqueer theory being taught in schools, children having life-altering surgeries and taking hormone blockers, men coming into ladies' restrooms. I mean, oh my gracious, are you nauseated yet? I know I am. And honestly, I'm at a time where I think a lot of us feel this way, that it's, I can't believe I'm alive to see all this happening. But again, if you tear down the biblical design of family, if you can destroy a society, then ultimately a nation will implode from within. So again, do you ever ask yourself what in the world happened? And yet everything we see happening right now in our world today can all be traced back to the attack on God's creation, to the attack on God's beautiful design on marriage. And, I think a lot of people try to compartmentalize and want to talk about different events in history, which is necessary. It's important. But the big picture, the assault on the family as God designed in his creation, the enemy knows that if he can break that down, then everything else will fall. And sweet friends, that's what we're seeing today. So again, my hope is that you hear my heart. You hear how, I came out of a feminist mindset. No disrespect to my parents, but being raised by a single mom and just seeing them chase after the world and not chase after eternal things. That's it right there. I want to talk about us chasing after eternal things. But again, it's important to understand the attack of the marriage, why the enemy attacks it, because when you understand your adversary, well, then you know how to fight back. And here's another thing. At what point, and again, I'm going to give you some breakdowns of some very important dates when things started to deteriorate right here in America. And we're going to talk about, was divorce always so rampant? And what was the pivotal point, the benchmark moment in history that kickstarted, watch this, that kickstarted the restlessness in women? And guys, do you know why I always reference women so much? Because statistics tell us that women are the ones who file for divorce. Women are the ones that get discontent and they want to go outside of the home. Now, obviously that's not always the case, but statistics don't lie. And we see more women that have bought into the cultural lie, the feminist movement, which was probably the most detrimental thing that could have ever happened to America. But it's important. How do we get there? And what encompasses the feminist movement? The anti-family movement. Don't forget that word. So what started the anti-family movement? And I would often ask myself this question, and I wanted to know, and again, I love history. I wanted to know the shift in people's mindsets. In particular, when did women start to shift their mindset? And I always want to go back to the feminist movement in the 60s and the 70s, the 1960s, the 1970s, because the feminist movement was a radical movement against the family. Again, here's that word. They were anti-family, anti-God's design. They wanted to break the normalcy of traditional family. They wanted to break up the normalcy of mom staying home, being a homemaker, being a helpmeet to her husband. So when the feminist movement came on the scene, that is when women's minds started to shift. And I'm of the belief, call me crazy, but I'm of the belief that we can recapture that and undo the damage that was done with the feminist movement. Because I'm going to tell you, it brought about a culture of death in America. I'm going to show you that with some of these benchmarkers in history. And again, I know some of you who might watch it. I know some of you watch the show that you are historians. A lot of you guys are homeschool mamas, and you're like, no, Toni, you can go way, way, way back. And you're right. I'm going to leave a lot out, but where I'm going to start today is in the 1960s and the 1970s. And so that is going to take us into the sexual revolution. Oh, we're going to get into some stuff. But again, like I was saying, some of you historians, you probably know a lot more than I do. But we can't argue with some of these very prominent historical times in history that changed America forever. Again, pitting the woman against her husband and demanding neutral ground, therefore ignoring God's given innate abilities to the wife and the husband, and ignorantly looking past the beautiful roles that both of us bring to the table. Again, I'm thankful that my eyes were opened. For those of you who don't know me personally, I've been married for 23 years to a wonderful husband. My husband's Toni Stockton. If you go back on our channel, you can see him on set with me talking about the biblical design of God. I went on to have 4 beautiful children, and the Lord, the more that I got into the book and got into the good book, the Bible, and I read about His design for our families, and raising our children, I was compelled and convicted to home educate our children at home with a biblical foundation, giving them a biblical worldview. So everything changed when I started to break off of this very damaging feminist cultural mindset. And then I started to, let me tell you what really happened, is I exchanged my cultural worldview for a biblical worldview. So in other words, I started doing it God's way. I started following His commandments. And so, but being raised by, like I said, I referenced earlier, I was raised by a single mom. I had a great stability in my grandparents, which I believe portrayed a beautiful design of marriage, a godly marriage. But again, I was still raised in the 70s. I was raised around this, we all were, if you were raised in the 70s and the 80s, you were in this toxic culture of deconstructing. We hear that word a lot, but we were seeing the traditional family being deconstructed. And when the sexual revolution came on the scene, it was rights for, not just more rights for women, which women had rights, by the way, because they had the Equality Act, but you wanted, the culture wanted more rights for homosexuals and lesbians. And that was the turning point where we saw America wanting to drift away from God's biblical design, the traditional marriage of man and woman, and they wanted to start reinterpreting marriage. And look where we're at today. And it's hard to believe that that is where we're at today. But so key thought, and I could talk so much about just this right here. But when a woman is seduced to abandon her role as a wife and a mother and leaves her home, her family, it leaves a ripple effect throughout many, many generations. And it will ultimately weaken the society, but it will ultimately destroy nations. It destroys everything in its path. So family is the foundation of a strong nation, and evil knows that. And that is why a mother's role, man, is so critically important in the home. It's so critically important for her to raise her own children and not sub that out to a local daycare. And guys, I feel like I need to pause. This is not even scripted, this part. These are just my thoughts. If you see me look at my computer a lot, it's really kind of just my journal over the past 15 to 20 years. But when you sub all these things out, when a woman is seduced away from her family and children are put in daycares, we don't realize the power that we have just given away. And childhood is such a short time. Like you're seeing me, like some of you have said, well, Toni, how are you even doing what you're doing? Isn't that considered working? Well, this is not even really a part-time ministry. This is something the Lord has put on my heart to. I come in the studio periodically and I have a podcast because I want to encourage my sisters in Christ. But majority of my time, my life is dedicated to my husband, my family, raising our children, preparing them for the world, and then sending them out. And mamas, that is how you advance the Christian faith in America. You don't sub it out to the church. We can talk about that a little bit later. You don't sub it out to the government public schools. If any of you guys follow me for any length of time, you know how I feel about that. Not because of the teachers, but just because of the government public school curriculum in general is anti-family. It's anti-God. And hopefully you don't need me to tell you that. But what we're seeing today, with everything going on in the culture and women being seduced to leave their homes, women being tricked and seduced to think that it's better for them to be in the workforce, it's better for them to be out of the home, don't raise the kids. Honestly, that was a setup for our children and our grandchildren to be collateral damage to the evil that was trying to come upon the families in America. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at some of these biblical and moral boundary stones that were removed in our society. And we're still seeing the effects of this today. And I remember, I wasn't alive when prayer was taken out of school, but we had prayer taken out of school in the late 50s. That was the first boundary stone that was removed. And there are still people that are watching today. You were alive when you went to school and they prayed and they spoke a blessing over you. And but we it's not only done today, but you are penalized today. You might be sent home. Your child might be expelled. It's very unusual to be in a school that's going to allow any type of prayer. This one I thought was, actually, I'm jumping ahead here. I don't want to show you that one just yet, but in the 1960s. So let's go ahead. And like I said, I know you historians who love history, and I do too. I could go way, 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 way back to Margaret Sanger. We can talk about her, but actually I have another guest coming on the show that's going to talk about her. In the 1960s, we saw a radical countercultural movement against societal norms, against traditional families. And we started seeing Marxism being pumped into our universities, just a different way of thinking. Again, if you can change the minds of men and women, especially women, to make them think that they're missing out, really, it's just a seduction. It's they're being seduced to move away from God's perfect plan. But I don't know if you know this next boundary stone that was removed. And when I heard about this, I'm like, that makes sense. That this totally makes sense. Now, one of my favorite presidents, other than Abraham Lincoln, is Ronald Reagan. And unfortunately, this is something that Ronald Reagan did, but he actually went on to say, and I quote him, "This was the biggest mistake of my political life." And that is when in 1969, Ronald Reagan signs the No-Fault Divorce Act. And let me tell you why that was so devastating to America. The No-Fault Divorce Act, it gave people a reason to divorce for just silly reasons. It basically, people were no longer fighting for marriage, and they saw an easy way out to a temporary solution, or to a temporary problem, I'm sorry. And that's also gone down in history as that was the explosion of the divorce revolution. And when you look back through history and you're trying to understand, how did we get here? I mean, how did we get to a place where men are marrying men, women are marrying women? You have men that are dressed up provocatively, which we call drag queens, going into public libraries, reading to children. You can really just kind of follow the breadcrumbs, if you will. You can kind of just follow the path of, it was a slow destruction. But again, remember, your big picture is God's design. Your big picture is evil, the enemy saying, how can I destroy something? I know how powerful marriage is. I mean, if you're in the Bible, you know that power is in agreement. When two or more gather, power is in agreement. That is why this covenant marriage between a man and a woman is such a threat to the enemy and to society. So let's go back. So people were no longer fighting for their marriage after the No-Fault Divorce Act was signed by Ronald Reagan. And again, people saw an easy way out to a temporary problem. And then you have 1970 come around. 1970 was the experimental age of communal living arrangements, and we're still part of the sexual revolution. People are now exploring sex outside of marriage. And oh my gosh, that just brought in so many different hindrances, and you had venereal diseases, and you had all kinds of stuff come about. You had unplanned pregnancies. And see, when you go beyond the boundary lines of the Lord, when you go beyond the boundary lines of this design that he set up, that is when you give foothold to the enemy. And I want to read this to you, because going back in the first of the episode, marriage, I talk to people. Do you know there's still people out there that don't, I mean, obviously, this is why we need to share the gospel to everyone we meet. But there's people out there that don't understand marriage as God designed. There's people out there that really believe marriage is something that came about by the government, or that marriage is something that you can create yourself. Anytime we deny God's word and we step away from his perfect blueprint, everything is subjective. And I wanted to read this to you just so you know, out of the book of Genesis. This is important because I guarantee you someone has never heard this before. But out of the book of Genesis, chapter 2, we're going to read starting with verse 18. So it's not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him. One out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the air and brought them to Adam to see where he would call them. And whenever Adam called each living creature, that was its name. So Adam gave names to all the cattle, to the birds of the air, to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper comparable to him. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs, and he closed up the flesh in its place. Then the rib which the Lord God had taken from the man, he made into a woman. And he brought her to the man, and Adam said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man." Ladies, I just want to see, I want to cast that vision to you. When you're not raised on biblical truth, all these voices out there, it can get so confusing as to what your purpose is. And I'm not saying your only purpose is to be married. But what I am saying, it is one of your biggest eternal assignments is to be in a covenant marriage, to raise a family, to advance the Christian faith. And again, it was a good day. It was a really good day that my eyes were open to what God really created me for. I mean, I have my own dreams, my own aspirations. Of course, we all do, and that's a good thing. But if we exalt that, that's a powerful word right there. If we exalt that above God's plans for our life, or maybe we just strong arm God and say, you know what, God, I know what the Bible says. I know the blueprint for my life, or what you think the blueprint for my life is, but I want to follow my own way. Guys, it will never turn out well. Hey, I've tried that. And again, praise God, it was a good day when, number one, when I was saved, I received the power of the Holy Spirit. John 4:24, I love to quote this verse. In the last days, my true worshipers will worship me in spirit and in truth. And when I started walking with the Lord, the scales fell off my eyes, and I started to see what my true purpose was. I can still be used by God to speak to women and encourage women. And I love to do interviews with people that are battling against culture, because really what you're battling against, it's not just a culture war. It's a spiritual war. And again, we can compartmentalize all these different things: gender confusion, gender ideology, marriage between a biological male and biological female. I mean, there's so many things we could talk about, but the big picture is God's design is under attack. And the enemy knows that if he can deconstruct, if he can seduce people away from God's design, that is when he can come in and steal God's people. Let me go on I want to talk about a few more things that happened in our culture. So the 1970s, it's a countercultural movement, talked about that, brought about equality for women. Homosexuals wanted the same rights as married men and women. They wanted the sexual freedom. One of my heroes, I love this woman. And I was introduced to her, not personally, but just introduced to her and her work and what she did in history, was a woman by the name of Phyllis Schlafly. And she was the founder of Eagle Forum. And she was a woman before her time. She fought against the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. You guys ever heard of that? The ERA, it was in 1970. I remember my grandparents talking about that. And what was happening was they were trying to put the Equal Rights Amendment into the Constitution. But see, what people didn't realize was there was already an Equality Act. Women had rights. They were voting. They were getting to work. They were getting, they were working outside the home if they so desired. But then the ERA movement came in, and honestly, it was a trick. And let me tell you how. It was a trick to bring about a constitutional law that would remove all safe places for women and children. It was to change the Constitution, therefore, again, removing those safety guards for women and children and making everybody equal. Let me give you an example. One thing that Phyllis was very passionate about was a lot of families were worried about the draft in the 1960s. The draft back then. And it had this passed, had the ERA amendment passed, our daughters would have been able to be drafted because they were all seen as equal. What about this? This is going to blow your mind. Had that amendment had passed, homosexuals back then, like a 250-pound man who let's not even talk about homosexuals. Let's talk about someone who's obviously mentally disturbed, a man who thinks he's a woman, he's dressing as a woman, he's 250 pounds. Even back then, they were fighting to have the same rights as women. And could you imagine the acceleration that would have happened had that amendment passed to the Constitution? So it's important that you have bold voices to speak into the culture and to speak into other women, to remind other women that your power, I love to remind women of this, because your power, you have no idea, at least I hope you do, and I hope you will after this broadcast, but you have no idea the power that God's already given you to be a helpmeet to your husband, to pray over your husband, to pray over your family, to raise your children, to home educate your children with a biblical worldview. Ladies, that is power, and it's short. It's a short time span. Childhood is a short season. I like to say it like that. You know, our oldest is about to go off to college next week, and I'm like, it happened. Like, it really happened. And I look back and I'm like, that happened really, really fast. And I'm so thankful that I listened to the calling of the Lord. But I'll tell you, the more that I got in reading the Word of God for myself, I started to see the beautiful design of women. And then I also started to recognize there's power in the woman. Why do you think, I'm kind of running out of time here, but there's more I wanted to add. Let's go on down the line on some things that happened as far as legally. 1973, you know, after we saw that sexual revolution take place, well, guess what came next? Well, Roe versus Wade. You guys know what that is. At least I hope you know what that is. Roe versus Wade, legalizing abortion, the birth control pill, basically encouraging you can have sex with no moral restraints. Folks, that's how you slowly crumble a nation. You bring in immoral destruction, and that starts to crumble a society, which ultimately crumbles a nation. And that's why we're at where we're at. Women, again, seducing a woman from her eternal assignment. Sisters, I know you've heard this before, but I want to remind you again. The hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. Man, isn't that a powerful statement? So childhood is so fleeting, and there's no greater joy than to know that our children walk in truth, that they have a biblical worldview. And as you can see, and like I said, there's so much that I couldn't get into today. I encourage you to go back through history and see these pivotal moments in time that were coming against the biblical design of family. But it was all to destroy God's powerful design of marriage, because marriage is a firewall. Man, that just hopped into my spirit. Marriage between a man and a woman is a firewall where the enemy cannot get to the children, and the enemy cannot get to society, and the enemy cannot crumble a nation. Just like going back to Ronald Reagan, out of everything that they asked him in this interview, one of the most pivotal moments in this interview with Ronald Reagan was, I remembered the faith of my mother, the faith of my parents, but I remember my mother diligently loving us, taking care of the home, praying over us, walking us through adversity. Mamas, if you ever thought that you are undervalued, your work in the home is being seen as remedial, you are mistaken. And I'm here to cancel that lie and encourage you to be just an amazing wife to your husband. Love him well, and he'll love you well. Pray over him, even if he's not a believer. Just going to throw that in. Even if he's not a believer. I can't remember the scripture, but it's in here. You love him well. You let him see you walking in the Lord. Win him to the Lord by your posture, by your faithfulness. Pray over those babies. If they ever needed us to pray over them and be a keeper of our home and shine God's truth and God's love on this generation, Mama, you hold the key. You are not undervalued. You are important, and this generation and the next generation needs you. Friends, thank you so much for joining me on this episode, and I pray that you go to our YouTube channel, click like and subscribe, and share this episode and encourage a sister today. Encourage her to walk in her eternal design as the mother and the keeper of her home. God bless you guys. See you next time.
If you've been deeply moved by the message on Standing Firm and you're committed to not missing a single episode of Toni's invaluable teachings and interviews, we invite you to take a moment and join us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel today.